Good morning and thank you so much for joining us. We've got quite a few people joining us this morning, which we're very excited about, but we'll just give it a couple of minutes just while everyone joins us. So feel free to pop in the chat, introduce yourself, say hello. Obviously, if we were at a face-to-face event, you'd be able to network beforehand. So yeah, please don't miss that opportunity. Pop in the chat, tell us a bit about your business. You're welcome to put contact details in. You might as well utilize the opportunities that are available on the virtual platform. So yeah, say hello. Tell us if you build a snowman, if it's snowing. Currently it's not snowing where I am. We've got blue sky, which is a rarity, but a nice thick layering of snow. So yeah, it would just be nice to know where you are, what you've been up to, if you have been out sledging, yeah, if you've built snowmans or anything else interesting, that would be great. Hi, Rebecca from Rackheath, Norwich. You're literally just up the road from me. I'm Sprouston area. Morning, Matthew. Thank you so much. Also, don't forget, if you're going to put something in the chat, just send it to panelists and all attendees, so then everyone can see and won't be missing out. Hi, Jim Mason, Works Manager from Line Engineering Services Limited in Great Yarmouth, specialising in subcontract machining services to a variety of sectors. Thank you. Jim, if you've got any jobs going, let me know, because I know a perfect candidate if you do. Morning, Sadie from Adnams. Oh, we need to do an Adnams alcohol tasting session at some point. That's just popped into my head. Old enough to remember Spangle sweets, but young enough to enjoy the snow. Love that. Lots of snow in Southwold this morning. Shannon Turnbull, Senior Workplace Health Facilitator from Thriving Workplaces, the free workplace wellbeing service in Norfolk. Love that. And hi, Leah from Norfolk Snow Sports Club. Gutted it is snowing. I know, we had someone yesterday, I think it was Emma maybe, from the Norfolk Snow Sport Club, and she said the exact same. And I must admit, I used to volunteer there, and it was so much more fun when you had actual snow on the slopes, especially when you were tubing. So when it was snowy and wet, they are the ideal conditions to go tubing. And again, I said we need to organise when it's open a networking / tubing session, because that sounds, well, to me that sounds like a lot of fun. Not sure if it is for everyone else, but hey. Hi, Kath from the Business and Intellectual Property Centre, Norfolk Library Services. Still hibernating. Oh, bless. I wonder how many people have blankets and hot water bottles this morning. Hi, I'm in, oh wow, the Scottish borders, lots of snow, too deep for the dogs to go for a walk. I work in the medical technology sector, currently working on a new startup to detect early signs of eye disease. Wow, that sounds amazing. And a quick one, because I don't like anyone being missed out, I'll just cut my introduction short. Good morning, Karen from Tiger Eye Consulting in Norwich, IT consultants. I'm freezing. Have you got your heating on? Why are you freezing? Get a hot water bottle. And also, hi Claire, I'm here with 2 hats. Again, what is going on? I'm a wellbeing and rehab therapist at Restoring Balance, as well as wellbeing manager at NATS. It's freezing down here on the south coast, but no snow. Well, it sounds like you all need to make yourself a cup of tea after this event. Get lots of blankets, hot water bottles, layering. Yeah, to warm up. Morning, Sue, Kingslyn, missing my grandchildren, building a snowman. Yes, totally agree with that. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kayleen Harrington and I'm the event manager for Norfolk Chambers of Commerce. So I hope you're enjoying our offering of virtual events, and thank you for attending. You can find all our full offering of events on our website. I'll put a link in the chat, so feel free to have a look after the webinar and book on any. They are completely free to attend. So, and I love this name, Spangle Trap, how to improve workplace wellbeing without the resource of Google. In general, managers think that improving their employees' well-being is a good idea. They understand that happier workers are more productive, creative, and less likely to move on, taking their valuable skills elsewhere. Yet, many are daunted by setting up or maintaining a high-quality workplace well-being approach. We don't have the money, space, or time to set up a play area with a ping pong table, fruit for every desk, and have everyone doing yoga every day. So, in this 60-minute webinar, Dr. Helen Fitzhugh, Senior Research Associate and Knowledge Exchange Fellow at the University of East Anglia, will help you step back from the Spangle Trap and learn 5 principles for improving workplace well-being in ways that get to the heart of what workers value: good management, relationships, terms and conditions, and appropriate support when things go wrong. So you're welcome to ask her questions during the presentation. There'll also be a live Q&A afterwards, so please use the Q&A function when you have a question. We'll also be using the chat and poll function, so you're in for an extremely interactive webinar. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, everyone, and I agree, pop the heating on, although I do like a shiny winter hat. I saw one of my friends in the street walking down with bright spangles, in fact, very timely, spangles on her hat the other day. So yes, good idea to put on those woolies. Hope you'll all be comfortable while you're watching today. So I'm going to pop my slides on in a moment and take you through the webinar. But as Kaylin said, there are points at which I'll be asking you some questions. You can just respond to the polls if you want. But if you'd like to put comments in the chat, please do, because then we get a sense of who's in the room and get a bit more of a chance to interact like we would have done if we'd all sat down for a cup of tea and a bacon sandwich together, although I wouldn't have had the bacon. So let's start. I'm just sharing my screen. Okay, Kaylin, also, I won't be able to see the chat while I've got my slides up, so if anyone does have a question, please do let me know. Great, so it's an interesting title. Hopefully it intrigued you when we were starting today. The workshop I'm doing for you today combines forces of obviously the Norfolk Chambers of Commerce, University of East Anglia, where I'm employed, but also the Propel Hub. And there are a couple of you who have mentioned the Propel Hub in the chat already. So for everyone else, I'll explain what this is. So I am Helen Fitzhugh. I am a knowledge exchange fellow. It's just a fancy way of saying that what I try to do is make sure that really high quality research that takes place in universities gets out to the people who need it in businesses, in other organisations, and I listen to what's going on in those organisations and take it back to the university. So the idea is that we have this two-way exchange of information so that universities and businesses and organisations are all learning from each other. It's a job that I love, and I've given you my contact details and my Twitter handle here, because if you have thoughts on anything you'd like to hear from us on workplace wellbeing in the future, anything the Propel Hub could do, please do let me know. The Propel Hub itself is a collaboration with researchers across 7 different UK universities and the CIPD on a project around productivity in the workplace, very much focused on the people part of that. So while productivity is often discussed from the sort of financial or technological point of view, we think about the ways in which managing people, managing conflict, managing diversity can all contribute to increased performance and well-being in workplaces across the UK. My work here today is going to be based on evidence you can find at these 2 websites. You're going to have copies of the slides, so you don't need to scribble them down. But University of East Anglia has done some long-term work with the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. And as I said, we're currently working with the Propel Hub as well. So if you are intrigued and want to find out more, there are so many more resources at these 2 websites. And one of the things that I'm doing today in the presentation is I'm summarising and distilling some of the research for you. So I won't be going into huge amounts of details that are about individual research studies. So if you have queries about where any of this has come from, please feel free to look on these websites or contact me, because everything is evidence-based, and we can show you where that evidence is if you're interested. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk what is Spangle Trap, this odd title that I put on the workshop, the webinar. Then I'm going to briefly go through 5 ways to workplace wellbeing. Some of you in the room I know have heard this before, so please do bear with us because we're going to talk about those 5 ways to workplace wellbeing, but then we're going to move on to other things that hopefully are new to you based on newer research and outputs. We'll talk about some barriers to workplace wellbeing, and then get on to the 5 C's, which are principles for approaching setting up your own workplace wellbeing strategy in a kind of coherent way. Then we've got a little bit of time at the end for setting intentions and the takeaway from the session and Q&A. It's quite a lot to fit into an hour, so we'll see how we get on. But hopefully what you'll go away feeling is that you've had a feast of workplace wellbeing knowledge this morning, and you can always come back for snacks to the Propel Hub website and the What Works Wellbeing website later on. So the first poll I have is just, I know we've had some lovely chat messages already as people introduce themselves, but it would be really good to know kind of what roles people are doing in their current organisations. If you would like to, please feel free to expand your answer in the chat. It's hard to cover all these possibilities in a short poll, but it just gives us a sense of who's in the room. Great, thank you all. So we've got quite a lot of people involved in human resources, occupational health and wellbeing, which makes complete sense. Some senior and executive managers, so hopefully you'll be able to cascade what you learned today through your organisations. Good, a nice range of people there, thank you. That's lovely. Okay, so everyone can see the poll results there. That's good. Lovely. Okay, so thank you. That's really useful to know who's in the room. I am going to move on to what the webinar is about. So if it will let me. There we go. So I love this picture. It's shiny and bright for our Wednesday morning. What is the Spangle Trap? So I've got you here on the promise of talking about the Spangle Trap, and this is a term that I made up, but the point behind it is that I did a consultation 2-3 years ago now with a number of different businesses across a number of different sectors about what people were doing about workplace wellbeing, what the barriers they thought they were experiencing, and generally what people in those organisations thought of when you said, what would you do if you needed to improve workplace wellbeing? And there was obviously a huge range of answers there depending on the amount of experience the organisation had. But one of the things that came up was often people would think of the high profile, shiny things that we hear about large businesses with lots of resources doing, like Google. So the spangles would be things like gifts, perks, the ping pong tables, the fruit on the tables that we talked about earlier, one-off wellbeing day events. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those, but if they are the only things that an organisation is doing, rather than building workplace wellbeing into the way the organisation operates, they can sometimes come across as empty gestures, spangles that look good in the short term, but aren't addressing the fundamental issues that underlie what people need for greater workplace wellbeing and to improve performance at the same time. And I've got 2 quotes here, which might give you a sense of what came out of some of these discussions during the consultation I did. So I was talking about how, there can be this issue of organisations going for a quick win with a quick gesture or a quick gift. And someone at a consultation event said, so it's just like with the boyfriend then. He can bring you roses and take you to Paris, but that doesn't make a good relationship if he doesn't respect you. just like a business can put on a wellbeing day but still treat you badly the rest of the year. So it's really that acknowledgement that although we all know that you know, a romantic relationship and a working relationship are different things, they're both a relationship. The relationships are things that take time to develop, and they're based on respect and mutual exchange. And if that's not happening, it doesn't matter whether it's a romantic relationship or a workplace relationship, it's still a relationship that needs cultivating in that way. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other quote we've got here is, we just want you to fire a magic bullet and make our lives better. Now, this was said absolutely tongue-in-cheek by this manager I spoke to during the consultation. So they weren't saying it for real, but it reflected as kind of inner truth that sometimes when we think about these things, there's so much else going on, especially now in the pandemic, that we would rather that if there was just an easy way to solve something, we would fire that magic bullet. And so that's when people say, okay, what can I do about well-being? I'll buy something. Rather than what can I do about well-being? I'll pay attention to the things that I'm just about to tell you about. So to sum up, a silver bullet and a bunch of roses is not enough, and it doesn't stop us wanting it to be. But I think one of the things that we can do is step back and say, okay, if we're going to really embed a good workplace wellbeing strategy, approach this in a good way, then we have to understand it's about these relationships, and it's about doing something that evolves over time. And, you know, yes, we may give some lovely events, we may give some perks, but it all has to be part of a more coherent whole if it's going to really address issues of workplace wellbeing and performance. So instead of these perks and shiny things, we know from evidence built up from systematic reviews and other research that say there are 5 ways to improve workplace wellbeing in a more sustainable manner. So I mentioned systematic reviews. Those are just when we take lots and lots of different separate research studies, read them all, make sense of what the message is that's coming out of all of them at once, and synthesize that into one document. And my colleagues at the University of East Anglia have been doing a lot of those about workplace wellbeing over the past few years. So they've come to the conclusion that there are these 5 ways that we can consider to improve workplace wellbeing. The first is wellbeing awareness promotion, and that might be where the wellbeing days fit in. However, it's probably a good idea to make sure you're making people aware that you're interested in and will support wellbeing on a longer term basis throughout the year as well. So wellbeing awareness promotion is about the organisation conveying its concern for people's wellbeing, that there are things available that we're going to discuss, and also helping to pass on signpost opportunities to think about workplace wellbeing in a different way. Then we have help if you're struggling, and this is when there are people who might be having either physical or mental health issues, or even things like financial issues or stress. And if those are going on, is there a place that they can go to within your organisation to get signposted to help, to understand what's available to them? And do they feel that the response that you're giving is something that supports them to get back to work when it's appropriate? So help if you're struggling encompasses all those parts which maybe are more covered by, for instance, the HR and occupational health professionals who are here today. Then we've got fostering good relationships, and this is about the idea of everyone within the organisation being able to talk to each other, have an understanding of who they're working with, and being able to trust and rely upon each other. So fostering good relationships is a lot about good communication, as you might imagine, and it's also about giving people the opportunity to get to know each other and interact, perhaps even in ways that aren't related to work. So for instance, sometimes I know that I've got a colleague who's working on the usefulness of volunteering days, where people go off and volunteer as a group outside of the organisation together as a kind of team bonding, but also doing something that helps them understand each other and do good at the same time. So fostering good relationships is one of those things that may have been quite hit by the pandemic. And in my recent webinar on a checklist for remote working, part of that checklist was about giving people the opportunities to still interact, giving new staff the chances to be inducted and meet other people, even if that has to be virtually at the moment. Then if we move on to the fourth way to improve workplace wellbeing, it's pretty obvious one, practicing good management. So we all know that we would like to have good managers, but there are a lot of accidental managers out there, people who are good at the topic, the actual action that they were doing, but then were promoted to supervise others, perhaps without being given extra training on how to manage people, extra training on workplace wellbeing issues and how they might signpost to help. So practicing good management is an aspiration for many, but is something that is not always addressed very easily in organisations. And then the final way to improve workplace wellbeing is actually one of the most important and fundamental. So it's not final because it's an afterthought, it's final because it's the thing we need to really dig into. And it's this idea of developing high quality jobs. High quality jobs are those where people feel there is some sense of, they have some sense of security, whatever that might be in the current situation, that they have an element of discretion or autonomy, that their development of whatever kind, personal development, professional development, is considered by the organisation, and that they have opportunities for rest and refresh in their workplace arrangements. So these are all things that are absolutely fundamental. Also fair pay, I should mention, goes into developing high quality jobs. And although when I was out on the consultation, people thought this seemed really obvious when I talked about it, I should again reiterate that the reason I've called this webinar the Spangle Trap is because people's minds didn't immediately go to this idea of developing high quality jobs. When I talked about workplace wellbeing improvements, they went to the things at the other end of the scale, the wellbeing awareness promotion, the gifts and the perks. So that's really the contrast that I was trying to make when I titled up this webinar. So when I did this consultation and spoke to people, they thought these were great. They wanted to try and do them, but they foresaw a few barriers. So why might people not be doing the good practice that I described on the last slide? Well, the people who I spoke to said it could be because it involves investing time. And as we know, especially in smaller businesses where people are doing multiple things at once, investing time can be a really difficult thing. And I'm sure that can only have got harder during the current situation. Then there is the idea that visioning and planning has to take place for what you think your workforce could look like or should look like in the future. And you have to invest time to spend doing that visioning and planning. But also if you're not sure what good practices or what might be best, or if you haven't seen examples from other businesses, visioning and planning might be quite difficult. Understanding the workforce is another key part of this. So if you're setting up a vision for what you want to happen in the future, you kind of need to understand what's going on now, whether you have any well-being issues in certain areas with certain parts of your business, whether there are things that people really would like improved and could make a big difference to them. And you won't know that unless you've had a chance to speak to the workforce and listen to them in some way. And some people do this through surveys, others through walking the shop floor, some through the performance management system when they do their appraisals and get two-way feedback. But understanding the workforce really underpins being able to set up a good workplace wellbeing strategy. Then, of course, there's learning how to manage with a people focus. And that's what I described before, is that people have good intentions and would love to improve their management, but how to turn to have that people focus while you've still got the tasks of work to be done. And then finally, this idea of changing organisational culture. So sometimes there are organisations where for a long time it's been about suck it up and get on with the job. You know, we want you to do this. It's most important that you are very productive and get this out the door. And there has been very little attention paid to workplace wellbeing issues. And sometimes the idea that paying attention to workplace wellbeing might be important can be quite challenging to people, because they think it means being soft or not paying attention to productivity or getting the product out the door. And I suppose the organisations that were most successful that I talked to during this consultation were those that did not see those things as in opposition. They did not think, oh, if we try and do this, it will make us less successful at what we do. They were the organisations that said, we really want happy, productive workers. We want to keep our workers. We want to retain people over time. And that means investing in understanding them, planning and visioning for workplace wellbeing, and making sure our managers really know how to manage with a people focus. So that's quite a lot of information to give you there, but I wondered if we could have a couple of polls where you reflect upon two things. The first is, which of the 5 ways to well-being that I talked about do you think is the hardest to achieve? And this is calling on your own experience. And again, please feel free to expand on your answer in the chat. It'll be really interesting to hear what you think. So far, practicing good management is looking like a winner. Great. Again, please feel free to expand in the chat if you'd like to. I'm just going to take a sip of water while we get the last polls in. Okay. So I think we've stopped voting now. So Claire in the chat has said, for many organisations, it's easier for them to do promo and provide support rather than tackle poor management practices. And I would absolutely agree with that. That's kind of the gist of this whole webinar. A lot of the organisations that we have worked with find it hard to push forward with wellbeing strategies because management may think it's not their job. Yeah, management buy-in is vital. Absolutely. So this is again, there's another in the consultation I did, there were lots of people saying that they were having trouble when line managers pushed back and said, you know, I don't want to be a counsellor. And I think the issue was no one is asking line managers to become counsellors or become experts in that. It's more about having those small tasks, tools of how you do interpersonal communication in a slightly more constructive way, and really knowing who to signpost in the organisation who might have more experience in this area than you, but not always offloading to HR. I think that's the balance to be struck in those organisations. They were talking about sometimes, you know, HR people were quite worried that line managers thought they would immediately pass something over when it might actually have been a team dynamic thing that could have been talked through in the group. Katie says changing organisational culture is difficult because they have wellbeing resources and mental health first aiders, but people don't often come forward. And that's a really, really good point. So it's about, you can make something available, but there are other things going on which are around building relationships, building trust, and making sure that people are informed over time. And we'll get onto that in the next part of the session. So I'm just going to move us on to the next poll. The next is, which of the 5 barriers seems most relevant to your organisational context? So this is where things that people said to me in the consultation were on the, oh good, I thought people have started, that's great. Yeah, these obviously overlap quite considerably with the 5 ways to well-being. things we've already talked about. Okay, and again, feel free to pop things in the chat to explain or expand upon your input here. Yeah, so we've got quite a lot of people talking about the learning how to manage with the people focus again, and also this idea of changing organisational culture over time, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. So. Yeah, so Adrian talks about investing the time along with the financial resources required to do this over a prolonged period of time. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's about moving away from single events or single perks and thinking, right, this is something we're going to keep an eye on in the longer term. Shannon says health and well-being isn't always viewed as equal as health and safety, so organisations don't necessarily invest time in improving this. And I think that's because health and safety has such a long history of legislation and really tangible outputs. You know, if someone falls off a ladder and hurts themselves, in the most crude example, then that's a very obvious thing that you can say, okay, here's a way we might change this. And health and well-being still has good practice, and we have evidence on what we can do, but because it's about it includes reference to human relationships, sometimes that can be less easy to decide precisely what you're going to do in the future. But we should all know that, you know, organisations still have a health and well-being responsibility as well as a health and safety responsibility. So I think that's a really good thing to bring up, Shannon. Thank you. And Sarah Daniels is saying well-being should be seen as part of health and safety. Exactly. Yeah. So it's part of that remit. And it's the part that people don't always notice as much because it's not quite as, it hasn't quite got as long a history of being included in that area, and people don't always see the tangibles of it in the same way, because some of it can be about mental health, motivation, engagement, and things which you need to go back to the workforce to understand. Lovely. So thank you for participating in the polls. That was really great. It's useful to hear your opinions in those areas. We'll go now on to some ways which you might address barriers that we've just talked about. So I've got here 5 principles for a long-term view. So this is the antithesis of the Spangle. We're not being flashy, shiny, quick and gone the next minute. The long-term view is about trying to embed these 5 principles into how your organisation runs. And just to say, obviously, again, I'm giving you an overview here, a synthesis of what the team that I work with at University of East Anglia found in 75 separate scientific studies, looking at 85 separate workplaces, 121 peer-reviewed journals, and 42 people were interviewed for the practice illustrations that I'm going to be drawing upon. So as you can see, there is evidence for what I'm going to be talking about. So if you are interested in that, please do come back and I can give you more references. There's also the link at the bottom of the slide, which you'll get at the end, and you can follow up and see the written resources on the website that talk about these same things. So our first principle is communication. Communication enables organisations to tailor wellbeing activities to specific workplaces. So if you are able to consider the ways in which you are communicating within the organisation, you can think about whether you've got communication channels which allow you to understand and hear from the workforce, which was one of the barriers that we talked about. And also, good communication is the basis of good management. So effective supervision involves clear task setting, providing support and appropriate resources, and being very fair and transparent about the allocation of rewards or opportunities to people within organisations. And the sorry, I saw the chat. I will not answer the chat unless asked. So yes. So if we're talking about communication, there are some things to check within your organization. So firstly, is communication specifically about well-being, but actually about anything happening that is two-way? So this is not just our senior managers and people and everyone with, you know, managers within the organization telling workers and their lower managers things. Is there an opportunity for the communication to come back? Is there an opportunity for, if you propose a new strategy, is anyone given the option to talk about it? If you're a manager and you'd like someone to do something, is there an opportunity for them to query you about you know, a particular way of doing it? If there's any, you know, give you options for doing it in a different way. Do you have a kind of open door policy? If someone needs you, can they get hold of you? So there are lots of things there about two-way communication that you can immediately go back to your organizations and check to see if communication as a principle is embedded into the way you run your organization. The second thing is, obviously, are you communicating clearly that well-being and the well-being of the staff within the organization is important? And if so, how are you doing that? If you've got things like mental health first aiders, as we talked about before, what are you doing to make sure people know about them? What are you doing to reassure that they have, for instance, the confidentiality people might want in order to be able to engage with them? Just in general, how are you letting people know about that service? And are you getting feedback on whether it's providing what you think people think they need? And is this principle of communication embedded in how you approach new projects? So if you've got something going on, even if it's not well-being related, are you always thinking about, have we included the workers in thinking about this? Have we taken any well-being considerations? And you know, if you can do that, embed that principle of communication, then that addresses a number of the barriers that we were talking about, for instance, around visioning and planning, around understanding the workforce, and about learning how to manage with a people focus, because you've already got that principle of communication in mind. One of the things I should pause to say at this point is the reason why I'm giving principles rather than very specific actions is because every workplace is different. Every workplace has a different context, a different thing that they're doing, a different history. And although there are times when you can say quite clearly from an evidence base, it's good that you do this action to improve well-being, that evidence is usually most effective if whatever it is has been trialed in the context you're talking about. So I've done some work with the police. There are studies specifically on how you improve well-being in policing, and I would feel very confident about saying to someone in policing, if you do this, then it should improve well-being. However, what we know about organisations and indeed the world is things are changing all the time. So something that might be useful to you now might not be useful to you in 5 years when things have changed. What we can do in those situations when things are changing is hold on to principles. And principles are things that are helpful whatever happens. So it's always helpful to think about communication, and that will help you address the barriers that arise in your organisation over time. So I think I just wanted to clarify why I'm looking at principles here. And these are the 5 principles that came out of the extensive work, getting all those smaller studies together and looking about what overarches them to say people who are doing well-being well in organisations are doing these things. So I hope that explains a little bit. So we've got communication there. Our second principle is coherence. Coherence comes from activities that are self-reinforcing and integrated into your everyday work. It requires not working against each other and duplicating. And so organisations, you know, however large or small, have different people doing different things in them at the same time. And you might have one section of your business who are very keen on workplace wellbeing and trying to improve it, possibly your HR department or your occupational health workers. And then you might have another part of the organisation that is trying to increase workloads to reduce staffing costs. And these two things happening at the same time may work against each other. Or you might have an organisation where, because there's not necessarily leadership from the top about workplace wellbeing, there are three different sets of people, three different teams who are doing things that actually could complement each other, and they don't know about each other because it hasn't been fed back, there hasn't been this communication. So the principle of coherence is not about saying there has to be one approach that is one size fits all. It's about saying, is there enough awareness within your organisation of what all the different activities that people are doing mean, so that you aren't setting up something which is going to be counteracted by someone else. And a classic example of this would be a performance management process that undermines wellbeing messages. So someone might say, okay, it's really important that you go for a walk during daytime hours, for instance. At the moment, while we're remote working, it's really important that you get a chance to step away from the screen. But then if there is something happening with performance management where someone is looking and monitoring a little dot on the screen to say that person wasn't at their desk for an hour and queries them about it, that actually undermines the wellbeing message, because someone's saying, oh, someone's watching now and they think I wasn't working. So it's just about having that coherence between messages about what's going on. Principle 3 is commitment. And I think this goes back to what one of our attendees today was talking about, this idea of it's quite hard to persevere over time, you know, even in the face of initial employee or line manager cynicism, that it's possibly easier to have the spangles because then people get excited for a moment. But really persevering over time is a very non-flashy, non-showy thing. It's something where even if perhaps when you start out, people aren't on board with it, your commitment over time, perseverance, talking about something and learning, you know, what barriers might be, is what will get you to that next point. So this principle is embedded in all the organisations we've spoken to who have a really good workplace wellbeing approach. They've been going at it for years, or if they've started recently, they've got an idea of how things might develop over the next 5 or even 10 years. You may have to start small and build up, especially if you're having that issue around time and visioning. But it's, as with so many things in life, it's not about waiting for the perfect moment. Actually, in a pandemic, I think we're all quite aware of that. There is possibly not a perfect moment to do anything when everything will be stressless and wonderful and you'll have all the time in the world. So it's about making that commitment and starting now. And I think one of the clearest ways you can signal that commitment to people within organisations is to pilot, evaluate, and find ways to hear about and learn from your mistakes. Because even if you get something which people are cynical about, if you're saying, okay, well, I want to understand why, we'll do something possibly differently in the future, or we'll help you understand why this is important, the commitment is really what counts there. Then we've got consistency. I love this picture of the jam. It makes me want to go downstairs and eat jam immediately. So I don't know whether that's doing that to anyone else in the room, but hopefully I haven't made you want jam too much. So consistency is the process of showing you have acted with coherence and commitment over time. And that's through building on existing people management practices, organisational capabilities, and fitting with existing norms. But I've put a really important note there: only fit in with the existing norms if they are not harmful norms. So what that means is again, as a principal, you will know your organisation better than I can coming in, or a consultant can coming in, looking at your organisation. You'll know what people consider to be important, what they value, what they think is normal. Now, if those are things that can be consistent with good workplace wellbeing, great. You build an approach that doesn't try and change people too much from those existing perfectly fine norms. But if there are things like toxic impressions of how long you have to work, or bullying in the workplace, those are the things that really need challenging. So consistency is about coherence and commitment over time, but also identifying those parts of the current culture that aren't consistent with what you want to do overall. And this is where, you can think about what's happened in your organization over time. There are some organizations which have been going for a very long time, and their ethos is around people for the long term. And if that's something that can be conveyed in your organizational culture, then it will support this idea of consistency, which then is reflective of coherence and commitment. And then finally, principle 5, creativity. So creativity is a very a positive word, and I wanted to finish on this one because it's about imagining how things could be different. I've put there, imagine how things could be different together. Again, this idea of communicating, bringing people in, hearing different voices. Then working towards the goals that you've imagined in a flexible kind of experimental manner. And included in that is this idea of challenging the toxic norms of overwork, discrimination, and poor management. And one of the things that's really interesting, I think, is do you actually believe things can change? So sometimes when I was out doing my consultation across different organisations, some people would say, well, I've tried this, this and this, and no one is responding to anything, and no one wants to do the amazing things I'm trying to set up for them. And they got to the point where they felt a bit jaded that they'd put so much effort into doing something and people weren't responding. And I think that's perfectly understandable, but it also is something where the principles of commitment come in and the principle of communication comes in. So it may be that in order for people to trust that you have a genuine, authentic intention to try and address workplace well-being, you have to do a few things first that aren't picked up, but hopefully will improve and gain more attention over time. And if you get to a point where you're jaded, you might not believe things can change, and therefore creativity might drop. And if the workers don't think that things can change, if not, why not? And that's another point where communication could come in. What would actually make a difference to workplace well-being? So creativity is something that is quite hard to do when you're tired, when you don't feel you have time. But it's actually kind of fundamental to imagining different ways of things happening. And I think that's something we've all been considering during the pandemic, because there's this idea of, can we build back better? We've had this awful shock. Things have been very tough, but because we were paying attention to things like people's mental well-being, can we build in practices that we learned during this time that will be of use to us beyond the crisis? And to do that, we need a little bit of imagination and creativity as well, that involves different people, different voices coming together to talk about what we could do in the future. So I've given you those 5 principles, and one of the things that I would like to do now is to ask you to pop some answers in the chat to these 2 questions. So one is, who can you take 10 minutes to explain this content of this presentation to in the next week or the next month? Probably the next week, because it'll help you remember it. And the reason I'm asking you this is because we know that if you try and explain something that you've learnt to others, it can help embed it in your own mind. And also, as a knowledge exchange fellow, I would love it if the things that I'm sharing with you could have an even wider audience than we've got today. So if you are willing to, I would love to hear if there's someone who you think it would be really useful for you to take 10 minutes to explain this content to talk about ways you could take workplace wellbeing forward in your organisation. And then also, what one action can you take this month to make a difference to workplace wellbeing? So please write any answers you might have in the chat, and I will actually get the chat up at this point and see how we're going. Lovely. So I'll give you a moment to pop some answers in the chat, and I'll have another sip of water. Great. So including on the next one-to-one agenda, that's fabulous. Emphasizing the 5 C's, great. Thank you very much for those who said lovely things about the presentation. Great. Investors in People review meeting sounds like an excellent place to talk about it. Conducting a survey again. I should also mention on the link that I put in the presentation to the What Works Wellbeing, there is a bank of potential workplace wellbeing survey questions that you might be interested in. Some people have got surveys already, but if you haven't, you might be interested in visiting that link, because there is a bank of potential questions that you might be interested in. Great. So Mary's talking about taking it back to an evaluation team to look at health screening in the workplace. That's brilliant. Claire talking about the importance of listening and hearing. Wonderful. My job is done. Excellent. Thank you. Katie is going to talk to her manager and to talk to the team about what they feel wellbeing is already like and how things could be different. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So I'll carry on, but keep popping things in the chat because we'll come back to the chat in just a moment. So, takeaways. Avoid the Spangle Trap. Workplace wellbeing is not a perk or a gift, but a foundation for your work practices. Investing time now is hard, but sorting out the problems arising from not investing time is actually harder in the long run. Communicate, build coherent programs, commit, act consistently over time, and create your own future. So I hope that's a hopeful way to finish the presentation part of this webinar. I've also got some notices that we'll have before the end about an opportunity for a follow-up workshop. But I will stop now, turn off my slides, and thank you for listening and offer a chance for any questions.
Thank you, Helen. I know we've got a pre-submitted question, so I'll ask that one and allow people time to pop questions. So feel free to use the Q&A. If not, questions in the chat is absolutely fine. So the pre-submitted question we had was from Rebecca. So Helen, how can we keep employees happy and increase morale while everyone is remote working?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. One of the things that I have been saying throughout this period is actually we don't want to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have evidence on what works to improve wellbeing and performance, and it is those 5 ways to wellbeing. So improving awareness, help if you're struggling, fostering good relationships, good management, and high quality jobs. So if you are interested in keeping people happy during remote working, maybe pay attention to each of those 5 points in turn and consider ways in which in your organization that could manifest itself. So for instance, the awareness raising part of it is around, making people aware that as an organization, perhaps you're okay with them doing things like I've said, go for a walk in daylight hours. You don't have to be stuck to the screen at all times. And then you as a manager, role modeling that as well, so that you're not the person who's sending emails to everyone at 11 o'clock at night, even though you said you don't have to. There's also quite a lot of advice on this in the webinar that I did last for Norfolk Chamber, which I think Kayleen has popped the link in the chat for, and there's articles on the Propel Hub and a link which you can follow where you can download a checklist which is about looking at ways you might support well-being and performance in the first instance when people start remote working, in the middle when you're thinking about maintaining relationships, and then in the long term. You know, we've all been doing this a long time now, so there are things that might need to be considered with regard to performance, feedback, training, development and networking. So that checklist is available, and I'm sure Kayleen will pop the link to that into the follow-up email. But if you have any questions about it, please feel free. But with all of these things, I think it is about maintaining those relationships and giving people the space and opportunity to have slightly more informal interaction than I will meet with you at 10:30 on this day and we will only discuss the work that we have to discuss and then I will go away. Having that exposure to each other is, I think, helpful for working relationships.
Thank you. That's it for the questions by the looks of it, but if any popped in, I will let you know. Shannon has also said, great presentation, Helen, thank you. If anyone wants to inquire about our free Norfolk Workplace Wellbeing Service, please visit our website, Thriving Workplaces, or send me an email. So that's in the chat function, feel free to have a look. Helen, did you want to talk about the upcoming workshop that you're doing as well before?
Yes. So a couple of notices at the end. The first one would actually be, we've got a feedback link, and I think Kayleen's popped it into the chat, but it's also going to be in the follow-up email. If you could fill in the feedback, I know you get a lot of these days, but it would really help because, as I said at the start, I've got quite a unique job at the university, which is a knowledge exchange officer, and it'd be really good to know if that role has been helpful to you. And if it has, hopefully we'll find ways to continue it. So yeah, if you're able to spend just a couple of moments, I'll be really grateful for your feedback. And obviously, if there's anything you want improved, I want to hear that so I can do it better next time. So please, yeah, feedback would be wonderful. Second thing is, we've actually designed this. So we've got the webinar we've just delivered, but I've also got a workshop at the end of March, which is a follow-on from this. So if you've heard everything that I've said today, are still interested and want to talk with your peers in a smaller group, something of sort of 10, 12 people, have a little bit more discussion about some of the things we've talked about, then that workshop might be for you. It's free again, but it's just for people who have either attended today or seen the video by the time we do that workshop. So we won't be kind of going over the same ground, we'll be going in depth a little bit. So please do follow up in that workshop. Kayleen's just put the link in the chat. I'd love to see some of you for that. And I think there was one other thing, Kayleen. What was it?
I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember.
Okay, so that's fine. Was it about your wider set of events?
No, I've popped that in the chat already. Wonderful. So it's lovely. It's absolutely fine. Also, just to let you know, the workshop will be a Zoom meeting, so we'll be able to see and hear you. So this one has been very interactive, but it just means that Helen can go a lot deeper and personalise it to the attendees. So yeah, we definitely recommend it if you are free and available. Great. And I've just seen, how do we get a copy of your presentation? So I will be sending it out along with links that I've put in the chat and also additional attachments. So I'll put an attachment that Helen kindly provided, which is based on her original research a couple of years ago. And then you'll have the presentation, which incorporates the new research that she's recently done, so it's kind of a top up. I think I've said that right, hopefully. Yeah,
so the newer stuff. Oh, the newer work is from the whole team. So yeah, there's a whole team of workplace wellbeing researchers at UEA, but the links are in the presentation. So the people who did all the work doing the systematic reviews, bringing everything together. Much bigger team than just me, and you've got the link to that on the What Works Wellbeing website, where all of that is kind of summarized and brought together.
Perfect. Well, it's bang on 11, so thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. Fingers crossed the weather will, I say, get better, but safer, I guess, because people do love the snow. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will be in touch shortly, as I said, with the presentation links, etc. And I'll also be in touch at a later stage when the recording is available, so you can watch it back. Feel free to share the recording as well. So the people that you're talking about discussing this with, you can then share the recording as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Helen, I don't know if you want a final farewell before I end.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for your participation. It's really lovely when everyone does respond in the chat. It really makes me have the sense that I'm in the room and talking to people. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you all.
Thanks everyone, and hopefully you will join us soon. See you later.